Hello, dear guests. Thank you for coming to our event, which is titled Serbia and Ukraine, Challenges of War. And it is, again, the topic that Belgrade Centre for Security Policy is closely monitoring as of the start of the aggression. And this time around, we are very happy that we will announce this panel discussion, and for the first time, we will have two people who are cooperating now with us. The first one is Katarina Šimkević, who is visiting us, and we are really, really happy to have her at the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. And also, Helena Ivanov, who is a Research Associate Fellow from Henry Jackson Society, and in the role of moderator for Belgrade Centre for Security Policy first time. And we are happy and we hope that we will have interesting discussion and debate. And there are a lot of things that we should, I think, discuss when it comes to the relationship between Serbia and Ukraine, but also I think this is a good moment because there are not too many, unfortunately, events on Ukrainian war in Belgrade or in Serbia at all, to discuss what are the perspectives and what is the status at the battlefield, what are going to be some things that will happen, and what are the predictions. On behalf of Belgrade Centre for Security Policy, I just want to mention at the end that Belgrade Centre for Security Policy will continue to be a Serbian hub for Eurasia, and we will host researchers from Ukraine in the upcoming period, but also we will host intellectuals who are at risk in the countries with the dictators and autocratic tendencies. So we will continue to do that in the upcoming period. And before, I want to just congratulate our panel, and I wish you a successful discussion. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Helena. First, I would like to thank Belgrade Centre for Security Policy for inviting me to moderate this very important event. And I also would like to thank our panelists, Katarina Šimkević, Mihailo Samus, Igor Fedik, and Vuk Vuksanović for all the comments and thoughts that we're going to hear during today's talk. As Igor announced, today we're talking about the relations between Serbia and Ukraine. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, the geopolitical circumstances across Europe and across the globe have basically changed, and we now live in this constant uncertainty when it comes to what is going to happen next. The ending of the war is nowhere near in sight, despite all the efforts that have been invested to stop Russia's aggression. At the same time, one thing that we do know for sure is that once this war comes to an end, the geopolitical and security architecture of Europe and probably the entire planet is going to look very different than it did before February of 2022. And finally, Serbia is also a country, and the Western Balkans is a region that is certainly impacted by this crisis. Serbia is also often noted because it did not adopt any sanctions against Russia, whilst also voting in favor of most UN resolutions. So Serbia is in a way considered to be an outlier. And of course, this raises a lot of questions. What is the likely forecast going forward when it comes to the war? What does this tell us about the relationship between Serbia and Ukraine, Serbia's foreign policy more generally? And these are only some of the questions that we plan to address today. To start us off, we have Katarina Šimkević, who is the visiting fellow at the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy and a lecturer at the Zaporozhye Institute of Economics and International Technology. She will present her recent study that examined the relations between Serbia and Ukraine from 1991 onwards. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hvala. Zahvaljujem svima što danas došli. To je vrlo aktualna tema za razgovor između dvije zemlje koje počeli svoju suradnju u neovisnom periodu nakon raspada Jugoslavije i Sovjetskog saveza od 1994. godine i odnose naše su zemlje vrlo komplicirani i odnose početkom razvijali se tek u oblastima trgovine, tehnologije, naučne i znanstvene suradnje. I sve bi išlo jako polako, kao i sve na Balkanu, ali situacija u odnosima Srbije i Ukrajine počelo mijenjati se nakon ruske okupacije Krimskog poluotoka i okupacije istočnih regija Ukrajine. Od toga vremena odnose Ukrajine i Srbije vrlo teški i ne mogu da reći što oni mogu promijeniti se sljedeće nekoliko godina i biti zadovoljni i za Beograd i za Kijev, zbog toga što naše su odnose komplicirani i na njih ovisi od ruske propagande, ovise od narative proruskih medija, ovise od ruske dezinformacije koje stalno šire ruske i srpske medije, ali imamo malu nadu da odnose će biti bolje nego imamo sada, zbog toga što je ljudi, je znanstvenici, je eksperti, je analitičari koji pokušavaju istraživati u čemu je stvar, kako možda promijeniti mišljenje u javnosti, kako možda promijeniti mišljenje u društvu, da bi Srbi počeli razumjeti Ukrajince i Ukrajinci počeli razumjeti Srbije. To je prvi mali korake, kao i moje istraživanje koje je radila u Centru za bezbednosnu politiku i to je vrlo važan papir koje pisala i članke koje bili u njinu. Oni su govori o propagandi koja Rusija stalno širi preko srpskim medijama. Glavni narativi koje Rusija stalno koristi u svojoj spoljnoj politici prema Ukrajini, to je što Krim je ruski i to je bilo tako odavna, što Donbas ima stanovnike koje uglavnom terani za korištenje ruskog jezika, što u Kijevu je vlada koja nelegitimna i došla do vlade nakon državnog prevorota i slično. To svi narativi koji još šire u papirima, u medijima, u televiziji, u društvenim mrežama i u ove sve vjeruju Srbi. Kad meni govori netko da Srbi vrlo podržavaju Rusiju, zbog toga što Rusija je istorijski partner, istorijski prijatelj Srbije, to nije tako. Srbi malo znaju za istoriju odnose sa Ruskom federacijom. Srbi malo što znaju čiji Krim bio prije 18. vijeka. Srbi malo znaju što Ukrajina prva od mnogih zemlja osudila je agresiju NATO u 1999. godine. Zato polako počeli izlaziti neki članke, ali tek u ovoj godini i jedan članak izišao prošle godine. Ukrajina podržala poziciju Beograda od 1999. godine, osudila agresiju NATO. Ukrajinska vlada poslala u Beograd našog ministra da bi on govorio sa predsjednikom Miloševićem i predložio njemu neki mirni plan, ali Milošević to odbacio. Za ovu informaciju uopće nije bilo negdje neka informacija u ukrajinskim medijima, u srpskim medijima. Ja danas čitala neke novine od 1999. godine na radiju Slobodna Evropa. Tam malo pisali za to, ali to je međunarodni medije, nije medija ruski ili ukrajinski. Ova slika u odnosima dvije zemlje mora i dalje biti istraživanja da bi pokazati i Ukrajini i Srbiji što tada Ukrajina čvrsto stojala na poziciji osuđenja rata. Hvala.
Thank you. Yeah, this is working. Thank you so much, Katerina. And we will get on with the questions later. But to continue this panel, we have Vuk Vuksanovic, who is the senior researcher at Belgrade Centre for Security Policy, who is going to tell us more about Serbia's foreign policy now following the invasion and more generally. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Helena. Well, I mean, the general framework of Serbian foreign policy when we are discussing about this particular issue has been the famous balancing act between Russia and the West. Of course, when Russian invasion of Ukraine happened in February last year, of course, a very powerful analogy was drawn with how Serbia acted during the original Ukraine crisis of 2014 and annexation of Crimea. Now, during 2014, there was a very simple playbook according to which Serbia's foreign policy elite played. The first one was simply lay low, fly below the radar to avoid being hit with any stray bullets, politically or diplomatically speaking. Of course, once the initial dust settled, it became a very, very old game. Let's play Russia and the West against each other to see from which side we can score a better bargain. Now, I would say that the temptation was pretty much the same, although with one very important difference. Step 2 could not be taken. The step 1 was, again, the logical choice. Fly below the radar, avoid, be careful, hide. But you can no longer play Russia and the West against each other because Serbian leadership understood how the European and international strategic environment became much more lethal and much more dangerous in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, for a very, very long time, we have seen that Serbia has again tried to play its old game, kick the can down the road, bide for time, wait to see what happens. However, I believe that in the past several months, we have seen several occurrences which testify about where Serbia's balancing act and Serbo-Russian relations are heading. And this is a reality in which Serbo-Russian ties will not be severed. It will not be fully terminated, but they are being significantly downgraded, primarily because of very objective external restraints. We cannot talk about some particularly substantial strategic substance in Serbo-Russian relations when Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov could not travel to Belgrade because European airspace was closed last summer. We cannot talk about substantial Serbo-Russian cooperation when Serbia cannot get weaponry it has already paid for from the Russians, also because the European territory is closed. We also cannot talk about some heavy Serbo-Russian relationship when Serbia cannot import Russian seaborne oil through Croatian pipeline of JANAF because of the EU's restrictive measures. And on top of that, we have seen some very, very important occurrences early this year. First of all, we have seen the famous story about Wagner Group establishing a presence in Serbia. I think that Wagner Group does not have the capacity to establish a heavy presence in the country. Theoretically, it is possible that there might be some Serbian nationals fighting for this private company, including in Ukraine, but I have seen no evidence that it is any particular heavy presence. But nevertheless, it does tell you something about the behavior of Serbian elites. They did not like the idea that Wagner Group could establish a heavy presence, primarily because they were aware that this put Serbia in a crosshairs. And at the same time, of course, a heavier Russian presence, Wagner presence in the country would be a political danger to the Serbian elites. So, but nevertheless, Serbian leadership still tried to exploit this episode by playing an old game of balancing and playing Russia and the West against each other, using this uncomfortable episode to their advantage. How? By simply saying, on one hand saying, look, Russia can also be a problem to us, while on the other hand still saying to the Russians behind closed doors, well, we have to do it because we are under Western pressures. But more important than that came President Alexander Vucic's interview to Bloomberg very soon after this episode, in which he openly, I would say, partied with Russian official policy on Kosovo. When he said, for us, Crimea is Ukraine and Donbas is Crimea, and that is how it's going to be. So this was Vucic's way of saying, we do not condone and we do not agree with Moscow using the Kosovo precedent as a trump card to invoke in territorial conflicts and territorial dispute in the post-Soviet space. Meanwhile, we do see something very, very significant, which I don't think it has been covered enough. Whether this is permanent realignment, I won't be so bold as to say it is, but nevertheless, within this balancing act, we see that at this moment in time, there is a partial tilt of Belgrade, not towards Europeans, not towards NATO alliance as a whole, but towards Washington, particularly when it comes to security and defense policy. We have seen that Belgrade is ending its moratorium on international military drills, and that this was done precisely because of drills with NATO member states, where Serbia will participate alongside its US colleagues in Platinum Wolf military exercise. It will join its US colleagues in Sinai mission, in a US mission, and that I think is a big watershed moment because for the past 15 years or so, the formal Belgrade's policy has been we participate in military missions which are under UN and EU auspice, but nowhere else. This time, okay, it is not NATO, it is not NATO's Partnership for Peace program, but it is a bilateral military exercise with the most important and most powerful NATO member state. And this is not the only case which is happening. We also have writings from the Turkish press several weeks ago saying that researchers from the Serbian University of Niš are cooperating with their Turkish colleague in developing early warning system against nuclear attacks on NATO border states, and in a project which has been condoned by the NATO alliance. Of course, we have also seen, of course, rumors with the leaked Pentagon papers on Serbia allegedly supplying ammunition to Ukraine. Now, many people have denied it, and as I said, I will leave it whether it is accurate or not. Of course, let's presume it is accurate. If it is accurate, then I would definitely understand why it is in interest of the involved party to deny this, to conceal it from the pro-Russian parts of the Serbian public opinion and to avoid making troubles for the Serbian government. If it is inaccurate, the fact alone that this type of information circulated is enough to tell you that things in Serbo-Russian relations are not what they used to be. And those people in the audience who have been aware of my own public commentariat on this issue, and they are probably bored of me repeating this same theme, but as I always like to say, Russian influence in this country and in the wider region is reduced to very three precise sources of influence: gas, unresolved Kosovo dispute, and Russia's popularity among parts of the population. Now, gas, as the EU is investing in energy diversification project that will probably create a reality in which Serbia will still be buying Russian gas, but this gas will no longer be used as a political leverage, but rather it will be a purely commercial transaction. Kosovo, well, we will see what happens, but we are seeing Franco-German proposals, so I leave it a slight reservation of what goes, because a lot of things can go badly, but let's wait and see. However, I think that the third one, and this is the critical part, is Russia's popularity among parts of the local population. And I think this war has brought about something of a reality, that Russian challenge in the Balkans, it is not military presence, it is not any corrupt business deals, it is not intelligence, it is the fact that Russia is a challenge on the playing field of hearts and minds. It is that in the collective psyche of large portions of the population, it is still a way where you can vent out some of your displeasures and dissatisfactions with the West. And this is how I think that Serbian balancing act will be manifested in the future. When it comes to the genuine strategic substance, there will be a whole lot more substance in Serbian collaboration with Western governments than it is with the Russian governments. However, Russia will remain in place for the simple reason so that the Serbian leadership can throw a bone at the Serbian parts of the electorate, so that they don't get embarrassed in front of them as completely shutting the door to the big brother. And this is what I expect in the coming period. And on this particular point, I will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments, Vuk. Now we have the third panelist who is joining us via Zoom. His name is Mikhailo Samos, and he is the Deputy Director at the Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies and the Director of the New Geopolitics Research Network. He will be telling us a bit more about the forecast and the development over there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Much for inviting me and having me on this great event, which we are planning for several months. And actually, I'm happy that I could participate in it, even online from Kiev. But I think that we will have opportunity to meet personally and discuss it. And I thank you very much for Katerina and Vuk for this great background on the current situation with Ukrainian-Serbian relationship, and especially Vuk comments on the forecast on how Serbia will act. And I think we'll discuss it even more, because I think that now we have some very interesting moment, especially in like Serbian Kosovo agreements on the next weeks, and it could have some impact on Ukrainian-Serbian relationship, as actually we had several comments. President Vučić and other officials, Serbian officials, they told about how Ukraine voted in the Council of Europe on the Kosovo membership. But I think we will have more opportunity later. Now I will focus on my topic. It's a military topic on the situation on the battlefield, on the Russian-Ukrainian war. So what I'd like to say, that situation on the battlefield at the moment is extreme, like peak of tension and confrontation. And why it is? Because Russia failed to complete the plan to destroy Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure. You know that Russia tried with massive missile strikes during the winter. In total, more than 800 cruise and ballistic missiles of different types were used against civilian energy infrastructure and electricity infrastructure. The damages were very significant. Kind of 50% of Ukrainian energy infrastructure was destroyed, but it wasn't catastrophic. The energy system actually now is restoring. The economic collapse of Ukraine did not happen. And it was clear, and now it's clear, that Russia was trying to create a humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, provoke a new wave of refugees to Europe, destroy Ukrainian economy. And in parallel, Kremlin hoped to undermine the economic situation in Europe by creating an energy crisis in Europe after cutting of gas supplies and destroying of the Nord Stream and other steps. However, you know that this strategy and the winter strategy, I would say, didn't work. As a result, since February this year, Russia focused its effort at the front line to a few narrow areas. In fact, it's several dozens of kilometers in the Donbas, especially in Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka, Vuhledar, Liman. It's different points on the map. If you look at the, I think you know these small towns. The front line between Russia and Ukraine actually now is almost 2,000 kilometers. But instead of so-called new full-scale offensive operations, Russia conducted only tactical attacks in several areas without significant success in reality. You know that in January and February, we had a lot of publications in Western media, in informational space, that Russia could conduct new full-scale offensive operations. Our center didn't support these estimations, and we told that Russia didn't have proper reserves and proper capabilities to conduct the full-scale operations, and instead they will and would focus on the tactical operations, what we have actually since February till now. And if you're talking about the current estimation, I would say that current situation is characterizing with two clear trends. Ukrainian forces preparing now for strategic offensive operation, and Russian forces preparing for strategic defensive operation. For our estimations, Ukrainian forces could start the active phase of offensive operations in next several weeks. Of course, it depends on the preparing of the capabilities. You know, the situation with Western help to Ukraine with armor vehicles, with tanks, with artillery, ammunition, and of course the weather have some influence and impact on the preparation of Ukrainian offensive operation, because the weather in this April doesn't look like the April. It's rather November with huge rain and pretty cold, so it's not very good conditions to conduct the offense. But in the same time, I would say the shaping phase of Ukrainian operation would start even sooner, with high precision strikes against command posts, control and communication systems, ammunition depots, logistics centers, and other Russian military infrastructure do not allow Russian forces to conduct effective defensive activities. What we had before in Kharkiv, offensive operations, and Kherson offensive operations conducted by Ukrainian forces, we had that situation when Ukrainian forces conducted so-called shaping operations before a couple of weeks, the decisive operations with the strikes, high precision strikes on the military infrastructure for Russian forces do not allow them to conduct the proper activities against Ukrainian forces during the decisive stage of the operation. And talking about a little bit on the scenarios, definitely the spring-summer campaign should define next paradigm of the Russian war against Ukraine. I can draw three basic scenarios which could be developed as a result of spring-summer campaign. First one is successful Ukrainian offensive operation with the occupation of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. It could be a different variants of real results of Ukrainian offensive till the end of the year. For example, it could be successful the occupation of Crimea and all of southern territories, but continuing fighting in Donbas area. Maybe it could be the successful the occupation of Donbas, but at the same time, it could be continuation of the Crimean operation, for example, in Sevastopol. So this scenario means decisive progress of Ukrainian forces at the battlefield. Even the final operations would be conducted in 2024. Second scenario, it's a frozen war, kind of Minsk-free or something like this, even without official agreements. And third scenario is endless war. Actually, second and third scenarios, it's a variance of scenarios of deadlock for this war, which actually are beneficial for Russia. since Moscow could use strategic deadlock as an opportunity to gain time, to concentrate new capabilities, and try to repeat strategic offensive in a couple years, as we see it since 2014, when Russia trying to use the Minsk agreement to prepare more forces and use these years of Minsk agreements to prepare a new full-scale operations in February 2022. So therefore, for Ukraine now is very crucial period to get strategic initiative, conduct decisive offensive operations, and deoccupy Ukrainian territories with next preparations for negotiations with Russia on the compensations for damages and punishment of war criminals. But of course, now we have a so-called the fog of war, and for now it's very difficult to have a clear forecast for concrete steps of Ukrainian side, and of course the real results what we have in the end of this year. So I think that we could discuss the details of these scenarios, and thank you very much for attention. I am ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks, and we will certainly have a lot of questions to address. But before we get to that, we have our final panelist today, which is Igor Fedik, who is the head of the Balkan section of the Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies, who will tell us a bit about the European security architecture following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and then obviously once the war comes to an end. Thank you so very much for joining the panel today.
Thank you, thank you, Helena. Well, it's obvious that on 24th of February last year, the whole global security architecture and its European component that the world was living last 80 years exhausted itself. Neither UN nor OSCE nor other regional structures, they doesn't work anymore. And the fact that the security architecture must be changed is it's a reality from which we cannot escape anywhere. And the security architecture is being changed at the moment, but its final outlines will be defined at the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war. So how can the Russian-Ukrainian war end? So at the end of the last year, in December, the administration of Joe Biden considered three models of ending this war. The first two are unaccepted for Ukraine because the first one involved withdrawals of Russian troops to the lines of 2014. The second one involved the withdrawal of Russian troops from Donbass, but not from Crimea. And the third model consists in supporting the peace plan which is proposed by President Zelensky, which consists of 10 points. We cannot talk today about the Russian victory over Ukraine because Russia doesn't have any military potential for that. I mean, the Russian victory in the sense that Kremlin see it at the beginning of the war, which is the do you hear me? Yeah. Which is the total control of Russia over Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainian victory is, or Russia is beneficial for the rest of the world because the world will be more safe and more predictable, and this will be the clear signal for other regimes in the world which have the similar to Russian intentions and aggressive policy, that their intentions and their aggressive activity will cause them nothing but serious problems. And what can be the future security architecture in Europe? So there are different views on this issue. The first, for example, one of them is the vision expressed by President Macron, who said that this security architecture must be discussed at the table of negotiations, but after the end of the war. I don't think that it's a good idea because the European countries, they have to have the vision of the security architecture right now, and they have to work on that. Their vision should be implemented at the end of this war. Also, he said about, again, talked about the strategic autonomy of the European Union, which is in the context of what is happening in Ukraine nowadays, it's a bit strange because the autonomous European Union without leadership, real leadership, strong armed forces, strong defense industry, resistance of Europe against Russian hybrid warfare, has no chances against Russia. So to my opinion, I'm convinced that European security architecture should be based not only on the transatlantic unity, but on enhanced transatlantic unity, and Ukraine should be part of it. And here I agree with the president of Latvia, who said three things. First, the whole world now has to work on supporting Ukraine to help Ukraine win, and this victory will help to create a stable security architecture, not only in Europe, but in all over the world. The second one is that this security architecture shouldn't be with Russia, but against Russia. Russia can be the part of this security architecture only if it respects and complies with the rules which this security architecture is based on. And the third is that European countries, Western countries, and mostly the European countries should realize that their security, in terms of security, they for a very long period should rely on the defense capabilities of NATO. What else? I also think that NATO should, shouldn't have to build a security belt on its eastern border, which is stretching alongside the eastern border from the north, from Finland to the south, Turkey and Greece, and fill this security belt with sufficient amount of troops and weapons. This will first be a deterrent factor from future possible Russian aggression against Europe, and will prevent the Eastern European countries from the events that may occur in Russia. Because Putin, with his war and his mobilization, start very, very bad things in Russia that will have very, very severe consequences for it. And also, very important, NATO has to return to the Black Sea, because what is happening nowadays in the Black Sea region, I would say it's a shame for NATO, because NATO removed itself from the Black Sea and let Russia take the control over the Black Sea. So NATO has now 3 NATO countries in the Black Sea, and NATO has to be there. Now, when talking about the security architecture in the Balkans region, as Stevo Pendarovski, the North Macedonian president, said, so the Western Balkans is the soft spot of the pan-European security architecture. Fortunately, nowadays, it's not a war zone anymore, and it's unlikely that it will be so in the nearest future, because part of the countries are the members of NATO, part of the countries are members of European Union. There are the European Union missions, both military and civilian, in them, and all of them are in the process of joining the European Union, which is, I would say, a good preconditions for preventing large-scale conflict in the future. At the same time, the incidents occur. There are tensions between the countries and within the countries, which can cause the problems not only for the region but for the Europe. So it's obvious that the security architecture here in the Balkans must be enhanced. And one of the steps for that, and I will not say anything new here, is the enhancing of the European Union integration of the Western Balkan countries. The European Union can make a concrete offer to the Western Balkan countries if they make real reforms within the countries. Also, the European Union can force the Western Balkan countries and their state leadership and political elites to avoid the steps that destabilize the countries and the regions. And I think that the European Union, which is the biggest economic partner, the biggest investor in the region, and the biggest donor, has all the leverages for that. Another thing, and it was mentioned today, is stabilizing the Kosovo and Serbia relations, which is of crucial importance for the region, because it will reduce the tension in the region. It will send a clear message to the other forces in the region that want to destabilize the region and the countries, and it will contribute to the rapprochement of the Serbia to the European Union. And also both NATO and European Union must be more active in the region in cooperation with the partner countries. They can have to enhance the cooperation with the countries and enhance the integration of the member states of the region in this structure. And also these both organizations has worked very, very hard on improving their image in the region, which and show that with their cooperation with the countries of the region, they can show that their success in the region and what benefits of the countries of the region can get from such kind of cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank all the panelists for their remarks. I'm going to use the prerogative of being the moderator to ask two questions that I would like to hear the thoughts of all the panelists, and maybe we proceed in the order in which you were speaking. And the first one is about Serbo-Ukrainian relations. So recently there was this research project that I've worked on, and as part of that project we've done some polling on a representative sample here in Serbia. Amongst other things, we've asked the Serbian people who should Serbia rely on when it comes to foreign policy. Over 50% say Russia, 20% say EU, 9% say China, and staggering 1.2% say the United States of America. When we ask Serbia, or the Serbian people, that is to say, that we've polled, which was the representative sample, we've asked them what should Serbia do in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 53% say neutral, 35% say support Russia, and only 4.4% say support Ukraine. Finally, as we've seen, Ukraine abstained yesterday on the vote when it comes to Kosovo's membership to the Council of Europe. And this morning we've heard, for example, the Minister of Foreign Relations of Serbia being very, very critical of Ukraine and very disappointed because on one hand, he thinks that Serbia is supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity, and Ukraine's decision to abstain from this vote is seen as a form of betrayal, as the Minister of Foreign Relations of Serbia has said. So now that we know all of that, I guess my question is, what does this really tell us about the mood within the Serbian population when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Their thoughts and opinions about Ukraine and about what is going on in Ukraine right now. How does this entire perception that people have play into the balancing act? And what can we do to potentially change that? What could be done? And I guess, Katerina, if you would like to start us off on that.
Nešto promijeniti u srpskoj javnosti prema Ukrajini je vrlo teško ako analizirate sve medije, sve članke, sve društvene mreže. Oni stalno šire laž o tomu što sada ide u Ukrajini, o ratu, o situaciji unutra, izvan Ukrajine, u svima oblastima. I je dosta u Srbiji analize koja pokazuje što to je dezinformacija, ali nažalost Srbi u to ne vjeruju. i pokazuju također ekspertni ocjene što neki Srbi počeli staviti neki pitanja zbog čega ima u Srbiji tako malo medija koje pokazuju drugačiju sliku Ukrajine, ali to je pojedinačni situaciji i vrlo teško nešto raditi ako nema sistemskog koncepta za to. Medije, društveni mreže i drugačije kontroliraju vlada Aleksandra Vučića ili to je neki ruski ili medija koji je ruski i oni širju narativi koji je pisani u Moskvi. Potrebna sistemska borba sa tim, ali to mora i vlada imati snagu da bi to zaustaviti, ali mi svi dobro razumijemo što to nije moguće. Ako vlada pripada Rusiji, a pripada zbog čega? Što to je energetska zavisimost od Rusije, što to nema želje da uopće prebaciti veze sa Rusijom. Također i društvo i vlada ima nadu da Rusija dođe i će braniti Srbiju od NATO, od Europske unije i dosta Srba vide u Putinu jako mogućeg predsjednika i svjetskog lidera. I promijeniti to jednoj ili dvama analizima, to je vrlo teško. Ali to potrebno pokušavati raditi, ne potrebno to staviti i ništa sa tim ne raditi. Ali to potrebno, na moj pregled, to je potrebni sistemski korake za to. To potrebno govoriti sa javnošću, sa medijima, reporterima. Potrebno ići u škole, na fakultete, potrebno imati saradnju ukrajinskih i srpskih think tanks. Potrebno više takvih konferencija i diskusij gdje bi mi mogli govoriti što događa Srbiji i Ukrajini u odnosima. I to može biti neka promjena na dugo razdoblje. Hvala.
Thank you so much. And Vuk, what are your thoughts? You mentioned, for example, how we can increasingly see Belgrade turning towards Washington. But if you look at what the Serbian population thinks, they seem to be as distant from Washington as they can be. So how do we reconcile those?
Well, I mean, there has always been a discrepancy about what are the objective international environment shaping Serbian foreign policy, and of course the public opinion moods which have also informed in part Serbian foreign policy behavior. Now, naturally, I mean, this is, I think, a very big point about why Russia has still sway in the Balkans, because the local leaderships, the local elites want Russia to be present. And they want Russia to be present not because they are mad about Russia, but because they believe that they can profit from inflating the presence of Russian factor. They can either inflate it and profit from it for the sake of domestic political promotion, or at the same time, of course, they can use it to blackmail and leverage the West. So, of course, the public opinion popularity of Russia has played a role in that. At the same time, of course, we also have to be aware that as we are seeing the factor on which we should pay attention, of course, is the one thing which drives local elites, which is the self-preservation principle. They won't do a single thing which will be overly risky or which will be dangerous for their lives, for their staying in power, or for their privileges. This is one of the reasons why I could never understand all of these since 2014, all the scaremongering analysis who believed the Kremlin will pick up a phone, dial Belgrade, and then Belgrade will invade some of its neighbors. I could never understand this type of logic and where it comes from. But nevertheless, I do think, of course, there is a very powerful contradiction in Serbo-Ukrainian ties, and I mean, a lot of it has been covered with Katerina's paper, which is out now online, Forgotten Friendship. You should definitely read it. I think that there is, of course, I think the issue of Kosovo, of course, is at the very heart of it. I mean, there is one statement from the beginning of this year by President Vučić who said, accusing all the involved great powers of hypocrisy, saying the only two countries which are entitled to speak about the principle of territorial integrity are Serbia and Ukraine. No one else has the right to speak about it. Those were his words, not mine. But nevertheless, even the mentioned vote, for example, Ukraine abstaining in the UN, I would say that it is probably a mix of factors. Probably, I mean, on one hand, of course, Ukraine cannot vote in favor of Kosovo because of its own adherence to the principle of territorial integrity, while on the other hand, it could not probably vote against, probably some combination. Displeasure with some of the Belgrade's policy, or perhaps not wanting to go up against its Western partners who back its efforts in this war. So this was the result. But what can we do about this relationship? I think that the best way, and this is, I think, the final policy recommendation from Katerina's paper, and I concur with it, that perhaps we should insist on the more positive elements of this relationship and promote these more positive motives. The Ukraine backing to Belgrade in 1999, the fact that in all the public opinion polls, including the one which was conducted by the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy, who said that that the majority of the Serbian citizens would be equally willing to accept both expats and refugees coming from both Russia and Ukraine. Perhaps we should be more, perhaps these are not always visible, the more positive elements, because everybody pays attention to the bad ones, but perhaps putting more emphasis and more spotlight on these elements is probably the better way to go.
Thank you so much. Going to our third panelist today, Mikhailo, I'm curious, what do you think, especially in light of, various potential scenarios that we can see in the front? How do you think that some of those might impact Serbo-Ukraine relations, and how do you think that we could approach them to try and improve them in comparison to where they are right now?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Definitely the developments on the battlefield has absolutely concrete impact on Serbian-Ukrainian relationship, especially since 24th of February last year. I remember that we visited Belgrade actually in early March last year, and it was a first impact and first understanding what's going on. It was absolutely unclear situation, but even in that time, when Serbian people understood that Ukrainians started to fight against Russia, it was a surprise for them, and it was even when we had a lot of discussions in Serbian think tanks at that time. Even in think tanks, there was understanding that something happened, which not only Serbian, of course, people didn't expect it, but for example, our Western allies didn't expect that Ukraine will fight against Russians, and Russia could get problems on a Ukrainian battlefield. Now, after the more than 1 year of this war, we definitely could say that absolutely geopolitical situation changing. And of course, Ukrainian and Serbian relationship will depends, for example, on the spring-summer campaign on the front line. We will see what happened in autumn, if after the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and how Serbian people will react on it. When, for example, when they will see that Russia get out from Crimea, and it's not a problem for Ukraine, no discussion comparing Kosovo problem and Crimean problem. even with Putin interpretation on it. So I think that we are living in very crucial period of time when actually we can change everything, and actually we could model a new period of our relationship. And I hope that we will define Serbian-Ukrainian relationship from the positive sides, because from my understanding, my estimations, and I believe in it, actually, that Ukraine and Serbia could be very close friends and partners, and especially in economical sphere. And I hope that after this awful war, when Ukraine, of course, win, we will have a new period of our relationship, and we will have a lot of success story on economical, maybe in other areas of our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Igor, what are your thoughts on this, and especially when it comes to like Europe security architecture? Where is Serbia going to be in that, and what is the best way forward?
First of all, I like to say that I agree with three panelists that we were talking before. With Katerina, that it's very difficult to counteract the perception of Ukraine and Russian-Ukraine war that exists now in Serbian society, when the pro-governmental media express it the way it's expressed today. And with work that we have to focus on positive elements of our Serbian-Ukrainian relations. And if we restart our relations, we should definitely start then on something positive. And I also agree with Mikhailo that after the end of the war, there will be a rapprochement of Ukraine and Serbia. So our relations will get better. And one thing that, for example, it might be interesting for Serbia, especially for Serbian military, is the Ukrainian experience of the war. So we know that there are a lot of, have been before the war, there have been enough, it's better to say, military cooperation between Serbia and Russia. So what is the sense of this military cooperation? I mean, the military exercises is that you gain the experience from one side to another side. And if we see how Russia is acting in this war nowadays, so what is the benefit for Serbia to cooperate with Russian military? So it's better to cooperate, for example, with military of the NATO states, which have the best military practices in the world nowadays, and Ukrainian military, which have the colossal military experience. So, and regarding the security architecture in the Balkans, I think that further and further, the weaker, the biggest destabilizer of this security architecture in the Balkans, which is Russia, the weaker it becomes, the more stable situation it will be here.
Thank you. And I guess my second question would be the following. How united can we expect Europe to really be during this war and then in post-war, post-war circumstances? We talk about this like we have a united stance of Europe against Russia, but if we look more closely, for example, we've seen a lot of problems with countries like Hungary, who constantly refuse or further frustrate Europe's attempt to be united. We've seen a lot of criticism coming towards Macron because of his visit to China and this idea that China may or may not be part of the peace process and peace talks when it comes to Ukraine. And similarly, we can see some cracks in the unity also when it comes to European relations towards Serbia. For example, the same vote on Kosovo yesterday, we've seen a very surprising instance of Hungary voting against Kosovo joining the Council of Europe, despite recognizing Kosovo as an independent state. And of course, we also do have this dynamic where certain EU member states have not recognized Kosovo is independent. So when we talk about like, you know, Serbo-Ukraine relations, but also the Western involvement in that, what can we expect going forward? Are we going to see the needed unity? Katarina, we might start from you again.
To je vrlo komplicirano pitanje. Ukrajina ima tvrdu poziciju prema Kosovo, ali ako gledate u budućnost, to će biti rješeno u Kijevu. I sada Ukrajina podržava integritet i ima tvrdu poziciju za to, integritet Srbije. Ali u Srbiji vlada i javnost mora razumjeti što Krim i Kosovo to je dvije različite situacije. Iako Kosovo je problem za brz ulazak Srbije u Europsku uniju, za Ukrajinu Krim nije problem i Ukrajina vraća svoju teritoriju. I u Srbiji mora da razumijete što Krim je teritorija Ukrajine i Rusija zauzela deo ukrajinske teritorije. I što dvije situacije vrlo, vrlo različite. Oni to moraju razumjeti što Krim nikada ne pripada do kraja 18. vijeka Rusiji i Rusija ne ima istorijsko drugačije pravo za tu teritoriju. I ne mogu politici, eksperti, reporteri pokazati što kod nas slični u tomu smjeru situacije i što mi možemo nešto imati slični mehanizme za rješavanje kosovskog ili krimskog pitanja. Za Srbiju to je pitanje koje nažalost je neka problem za ulazak u Europsku uniju, ali Beograd na pregovorima u Bruselu ili negdje drugačije evropskim komisarima reče jedno za pitanja vezano sa Kosovom, a rade drugo. Zbog toga ulazak Srbije u Uniju je vrlo, vrlo težak, kompliciran i nije brz. I neki perspektivi 5-10 godina, to je vrlo neka perspektiva udaljenosti. Za Ukrajinu, Ukrajina će vratiti teritoriju i Ukrajina vraća svoju teritoriju. I mehanizmi za vraćanje će biti drugačiji. I ujedinjenost u ovom gledati, to bi bilo neka greška, ali Ukrajina i Srbija mogu da govoriti u ovom smjeru da bi i vlada i ljudi i svi razumjeli kako Ukrajina može pomoći u rješavanju ovog pitanja, a Ukrajina može da pomoći. Prvo što može raditi Ukrajina i što rade, ona objašnjava i na diplomatskom nivoju i na nivoju medija, društvenih mreža, znanstvenom nivoju, što Krim je ukrajinski. A to je naša teritorija i Rusija zauzela našu teritoriju. I to je prvi korak u razumijevanju ovog pitanja. Vi ako pitate Srbe negdje na ulicama Beograda, Novog Sada, što oni odgovaraju, što Krim je ruski. To je prvi ruski narativ koji je počelo širiti se u srpskim medijama od 14. godine. I to je narativ koji je otišao u njemački, italijanski i drugačije medije, koje i Rusija to podržava. Onda gledate na to kao nešto objedinjene ne mogu. Hvala.
Thank you for that. And for you, Vuk, what do you think? How this potential cracks in European unity might impact Serbia's balancing act?
Well, of course, the longer this war continues, yes, it will be more challenging to preserve European unity. I think that this is something, of course, that Ukrainians are concerned about and which they think about, of course, naturally. But I don't have that type of crystal ball to predict whether this type of crack will happen or how long will this unity last. The crystal ball I do not have, but of course, as I said, there is awareness of the importance of this unity for the Ukrainians. But when it comes to Serbian foreign policy, I believe that if there is a strong force of disunity among European states regarding Ukraine war, then this will play in Vucic's hands, and it will make his life easier, because he will be able to avoid making the tough choices. And we can say that there is a very powerful analogy of Vucic frequently using what has been European or Western missteps in order to score diplomatic points and to get ahead. I mean, frequently he would say, well, why are you angry at me for doing this or that with Russia or China? Hungary is a NATO and EU member state, and they are doing it. Talk to them. Turkey is a NATO member state, and it is doing that. Talk to them. Macron is worried about losing economic investments from China. Well, talk to him. If he's worried, why shouldn't I be worried? Oh, why should I do anything regarding Kosovo and commit political suicide when European Union did what it did to North Macedonia after agreeing to the change in its constitutional name? And on this point, I think that if there is a serious crack in European unity, the most probable course of action for Serbian elites will be again to try to use this unity in order to score a better bargain for themselves. Because there is one thing that we keep forgetting, because this was more pronounced during COVID-19 pandemic and before of the Ukraine war, but Serbian leadership is not just balancing and playing Western and non-Western powers against each other. It is frequently capable of balancing and playing various members of the Western community against each other. Let us not forget how easy it was for Serbian leadership to forget its friendship with Angela Merkel's Germany when they believed that they would score a better bargain with Donald Trump's United States. Or the fact that before the war, when Vucic said at one point, well, one of the countries on which we will be relying much more in the future is Poland. He was evidently thinking about Warsaw-Budapest alliance, which existed during this time and which was shaken over the fact that the two countries have a different attitude towards the war in Ukraine. But nevertheless, this was the logic which guides him. So, if this crack in European unity takes place, the one which you are asking about, then I expect that this will be a very good gift which would fall into the lap of Belgrade's foreign policy elites.
Thank you. And Mikhailo, what do you think? Presumably maintaining this unity is particularly important for the likely or less likely scenarios we can see on the front. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that maybe paradoxical thing, but I think that this Russian-Ukrainian war is testing the European Union for all of problems. And I wouldn't say that before 24th of February last year, European Union didn't have problems. If we're talking about the stability, effectiveness of making decision process, or another, let's say, the bureaucratic procedures. For example, the last propositions, last Macron activities on China direction, together with, again, talking about the strategic autonomy. And at the same time, if you're talking about the practice, the ammunition project with 1 billion euro for producing of the ammunition for Ukraine, Poland and France started to make a conflict, trying to get, let's say, the benefits for example, France trying to get the benefits for the French defense industry. And of course, it was traditional approach for France to protect and to lobby the French defense industry. But during the war period, I think it's a chance for Europe to find the way how to act more effective. And I'm sure that all of these, let's say, problems, which looks like something new, we had a 20 years before, when the so-called sovereignty problems in security and defense policy, and of course in defense industry, when the French defense industry, of course, they had a competition with German defense industry, and Dutch defense industry, Italy, and etc. Now we have a chance. I mean, European Union has a chance to understand these problems and maybe to act more effective. And I'm sure, for example, for ammunition project for Ukraine, France and Poland will find the way how to, let's say, find a compromise. And I'm sure that maybe after this period, it will be more resilient and more, let's say, more stable European Union than before full-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine. And of course, for Serbia and Ukraine, as we actually candidates to be European Union members, it's a chance to understand European Union better from the positive way, not to find it always to find the negative, let's say, sides. Of course, Hungary, it's a specific country now with specific positions on different problems, different questions. But I'm sure that this is period even before end of the war. It's a chance. It's a period for chance for European Union and for Ukraine and Serbia to find the better ways how to be stronger and more resilient on this very unstable strategic environment. Because, to be honest, I'm sure that even after this war, after Ukrainian victory, it will be not the best environment on the geopolitical. If we talk on geopolitical understanding, if we talk on a global scale, I am sure it will be next several, I would say, decades of very unstable environment for us, all of us, and we should be prepared better for this very unstable and not very comfortable period of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, before we move to audience questions, how do you think that Europe is going to be united in how it builds its security architecture after the war comes to an end?
I'm a bit positive in this issue, because what we have seen for this period, more than 1 year of war, that yes, Europe on one side it's more united than it was before the war, but nevertheless there are issues within the Euro, between the countries, in the perception on the war, of how this war should end, and so on and so forth. And every time we see different challenges that occur within the European Union, but somehow the European countries, with the help of the transatlantic partners, they somehow manage these challenges. And I think that, I agree with Mikhailo that we, in next 1 or maybe 2 decades, next decades, will live in quite unstable circumstances. But I think that European Union, considering all this situation, all the challenges that might occur out of this, and are working today on becoming more united and more stronger, and that it will become them, these countries, to live this period more safe.
Thank you so much, and let's open the floor to the audience, and thank you all the panelists again for both remarks on the questions and generally. I suggest we take a few, and then the panelists can address them. Do we have a microphone? Yes? Lady in the front row.
Thank you so much for a most interesting panel. Thanks to all the 5 participants. I am Sweden's ambassador to Serbia, Annika Ben-David, and I'd like to latch on to what Igor Fedek said in his concluding statements, that after all, the full-scale invasion has ushered in an unprecedented unity among the European Union members, and 27 states committed to the rules-based international order has withheld that unity now 14 months into the war and through 10 sanctions packages. Now, my country represents the European Union this half semester, and we, 3 months into the war, had abandoned 2 centuries of military non-alignment, which goes to show how huge this shift is for the security architecture in Europe. Now, we have made, Sweden has made upholding this unity the prime goal of our EU presidency. We have said repeatedly that we will stand by Ukraine until Ukraine wins. This will take as long as it takes. Now, I have a question, because you, Mr. Fedek, you spoke a little bit about EU advocacy and EU action and what could be done in the Western Balkans, but I would like Vuksanovic to perhaps comment on what, if any, space does the EU have in influencing Serbia in its geostrategic orientation or choice. We are doing what we can. Our foreign minister, the Swedish foreign minister, was here laying out in very concrete terms what we expect from Serbia. But does the EU have a scope, and how, if we do, how can we best use it? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. Do we have more? Because we're going to take them all now, and then the panel will have a chance to address them. The gentleman in the back.
Hvala, ja ću na srpskom. Aca Vukalović, Udruženje e-sigurnost, bavimo se sajber bezbednošću, zaštitom kritičnih infrastruktura i tako dalje. Ja se ne slažem, pa bih voleo komentar u vezi toga, da ovde postoji ruski uticaj. Ruski uticaj u Srbiji je samo u ruskom domu. Ovde se koristi ruska propaganda za unutrašnje potrebe. A koje su unutrašnje potrebe? Tu je krivica i Evrope. Od pada Berlinskog zida se o tome u Srbiji i za Srbiju ćuti. Koje su to unutrašnje potrebe da mi koristimo rusku propagandu? I drugo pitanje, kratko, ovde svi pominju bezbednost Zapadnog Balkana, pa ajde da proširimo na Balkan, ali svi izbegavaju, računajući i Zapad, da govorimo o odbrani koja se odnosi na odbranu zapadne civilizacije na jugoistoku Evrope, pre svega iz razloga jer u posljednje vreme Rusija tvrdi, kosi se sa istorijom, da oni ne pripadaju zapadnoj civilizaciji, nego da je to ruska civilizacija. Na koji način možete da odgovorite na to kako ovo utiče na odbranu, a bezbednost? Srbija će se prilagoditi bilo čemu, samo da kapju evri ovamo. Ali kako utiče potencijalno na bezbednost, to me pitanje interesuje. Hvala lepo.
Thank you. And do we have any other questions? Okay, yeah.
Thank you for a great panel debate. I'm from the Danish embassy, and my question is, to what degree does it make sense to use the historical legacy of the non-aligned movement to understand the Serbian foreign policy today? Does it have real impact on the decision from the leadership, and also does it influence the population of Serbia's stance on the conflict in Ukraine today?
Great. Thank you for those questions. I think it's best to proceed again in order and give each panelist an opportunity to address some of the questions that we've had. So starting with you, Katerina. What do you think, for example, about the non-aligned movement? I'm not sure you understood the question from the gentleman and from, the first one. Yeah.
Ruska propaganda nalaze ne tek u Ruskom domu, ruska propaganda nalaze svuda i to nije greška Evrope. to je greška također Srbije. Srbija mora prvo Srbija mora razumjeti što ona dala dozvolu da ovdje jako dobro rade ruska propaganda. I Srbam to jako odgovara. Zbog čega odgovara? Evropska unija dopustila jednu grešku, na moje mišljenje, kad u 1995. godini ne pokazala Srbije što Srbija je kriva za genocid koji je počinjela u Hrvatskoj i Bosni. I nakon toga Evropska unija pokazala što Srbija nije kriva za situaciju u Kosovu i što se Evropska unija od kraja 90. godine počela igračke sa Srbijom da bi ovdje opet ne ponoviti konflikte i ne ponoviti ratove. Srbija i Srbi od toga vremena osjeća sebe kao narod, kao država koja je neki neprijatelj, neki trojanski konj i koje stalno ima neku vinu ispred drugimi naroda. Rusija to koristi na svoj način. Srbija vidi što Rusija može da pomogne, ali Rusija nikad nije htjela pomoći Srbiji i Srbima. Probleme unutrašnje u Srbiji i u srpskom društvu Rusija stalno koristi na svoj način. I to Rusi jako dobro razumije. Ako vi možete pitati negdje u Moskvi ili u Peterburgu što je Srbija ili kao slični ruski jezici i srpski jezic, ruski i srpski jezik, malo ljudi u Rusiji znaju što uopće događa sada ili prije godinu dana u Srbiji. Rusi uopće ne razumiju i ne znaju. Oni znaju gdje nalazi Srbija. A koje odnose ide i razviju između dvije zemlje, uopće to ne zna. I kao u Srbiji ne znaju istinsku sliku što sada je u Rusiji. Što tamo jako siromaštvo. Što tamo svi ljudi žive jako, jako loše. I što Rusija sada pokazuje što je tek ruska civilizacija, to nasuprot zapadnoj civilizaciji i šire svoje narativi u medijima, u drugima tehnologijama, da pokaže što zapadna civilizacija to je neka crna rupa koja krše svi morale, sve etike i to je to. Hvala.
Thank you. And moving on to you, Vuk, and if I can just ask the panelists to be a bit brief because we're already slightly over time, but we've started a bit later. So please, Vuk, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I will be very cynical on this point. I mean, I think that the European Union for a very long time has committed a series of reputational and strategic suicides in this region, and that their leverage has been decreased significantly. I think that when we talk, for example, about Aleksandar Vučić, I think that we should always mention the fact that there were always several Aleksandar Vučićes during these 10 years in power. He tends to evolve both his stances and his policies depending on the challenges. I think that when it comes to the European Union, there were two very transformative events which have shaped his very cynical attitude towards the European Union. The first one was after the signing the Brussels Agreement on Normalization of Relations between Serbia and Kosovo. The first thing that the new president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said in his address to the European Parliament, in the next 5 years, there won't be new EU member states in the ranks. So Aleksandar Vučić, the master of power play, understood this in the following fashion. I'm risking of committing a political suicide by signing a deal regarding Kosovo, and this is how I get rewarded. And the second one was the mentioned case of North Macedonia and what was done to North Macedonia. So from that moment on, Aleksandar Vučić's attitude towards Europe has been transactional approach. Great, we are economic partners, feel free, We will nurture our commercial ties. Please feel free to invest. Please feel free to travel. You are all welcome. But when it comes to the political dealings, money on the table first. And I'm sorry to have to say, but in this environment, the only thing that, because since the global financial crisis of 2008, with the exception of Croatia, which became the last member states to join the EU ranks in 2013, this region has been terra incognita for the European Union. They have been there in terms of money and in terms of projects, but in terms of serious political strategy, the European Union has not been here. And that is why we are not talking about success of Russia, China, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Israel. We are talking about European failure. And so the only thing which the EU can do is to come up with a very, very strategically elaborated blueprint. This is how it goes. This is what happens with the EU accession talks. This is what you will do, but then we will do X, Y, and Z. This is how it goes. I mean, but with all of these technocratic talks, with all of these talks, reforms, you will do this, and then, of course, even if you say you will do this and we will do that, even that is not enough after Macedonia for anyone to believe in EU's credibility. I'm sorry if I have been rough in my assessment, but I have a bad reputation on this front. And of course, the issue about non-aligned movement and non-aligned legacy, yes, there has been that, although, of course, you can also say that in case of this particular country, you do have a very powerful instinct which originates from the days when this country was getting its independence from the Ottoman Empire, where it constantly had to, of course, on one hand, had to ask for help from the Russian Empire, but of course, had to balance with the British Empire, who was always against the Balkan nations getting their independence because of Russia, balancing with the Ottomans. So this idea that great powers are, that it is dangerous to anger great powers, but it is also potentially dangerous to be too tightly in their embrace, is something which is ingrained in the local political psyche of both the elites and wider population. You don't have to think intellectually about history of international relations, but the instinctive tendency is there. And of course, the legacy of Tito and non-aligned Yugoslavia partially plays into this rubric. So yes, while historical analogies are a complicated thing because these are subjective perceptions and they are never fully aligned with the harsh realities of practical foreign policy, these historical analogies do in part inform Serbian behavior.
Thank you so very much for that book. And Mikhailo, I was wondering if you have any comments that you would like to add on the questions that our audience had. Just again, kindly asking to keep it brief because we're over time already. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try to be as brief as possible, and I will continue what Vuk told about the European Union integration, but in opposite way. Yeah, of course, the Serbia and Ukraine had not the best experience on the European integration process, but again, I say maybe a paradoxical thing, but now during the war, we have a chance, and especially European Union has a chance to change approach from a bureaucratic, technocratic way to a more political, responsible way, and trying to have responsibility, each responsibility in both regions, the Western Balkans and post-Soviet Union area. And actually, we created the Balkan-Ukraine Cooperation Network in the same task, with this task to find the common approach in not only, of course, in European integration model, but trying to find the way how to find the maybe some common model to be more successful on the European integration approach. And I hope that this war will change European Union from inside, and especially in enlargement policy, and I hope that in some time we will find a new impulse for Serbia and for Ukraine to be members of European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And finally, Igor, what would be your final thoughts on the questions from the audience?
So this war is the time for real leadership. And European Union nowadays needs a real leadership, and regarding the Western Balkans and the integration of the Western Balkan countries to the European Union. So what is the leadership? It is also the making tough decisions and taking responsibility for them. So European Union must slightly get rid of really of this technocratic approach and make more the relations between the Western Balkan countries and the European Union more clear. So what I mean, if there are you see that some problems or some challenges in relations with the Western Balkan countries, you have to say you have these problems. You have to change this and to change this. Unless you change this, there will be no integration. Everything have to be clear. Of course, it's not the things that some countries or some political leaders will like to hear here, but then the situation will be more or less, it will be clear. And of course, there have to be the strategic communication, because it will the European Union then have to communicate with the population of the region, so that the population will have to know why such things are happening, why such decisions are taken. So without this, nothing will happen.
Thank you. I believe this is where we have to conclude our panel. I would like to thank the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy for inviting me to moderate and organizing this panel. I would also love to thank our panelists for their very insightful comments. And I would like to thank the audience, both for their attention and their very interesting questions. And I do hope to see some of you somewhere again as we talk about these important topics. Thank you so very much again.